On June 6, 1912, the largest volcanic eruption of the 20th century put Katmai on the map forever. Novarupta, as the newly formed volcano was called, it really showcased nature's raw power. It was both a force of destruction and creation. It rendered the land uninhabitable for those who had previously called it home, while also creating the Valley of 10,000 Smokes, a geologic wonder, a landscape and site of exploration, discovery, and scientific importance. Welcome everybody to today's live chat on the explore.org bear camps. My name is Ranger Lian and I am joined today by Ranger Sarah Gage. And today we are talking about the Valley of 10,000 Smokes through the lens of exploration. So something a little bit different than our normal live chats. But as always, feel free if you have questions to put those in the comments on the live chat, and hopefully we will have some time to answer those at the end. But thank you, Sarah, for joining us today and for sharing your expertise on the Valley. But in addition to that, we are also showcasing something from the park that we are developing. And I believe you are heading up that project. Could you tell us more about that?
Absolutely. So I am leading a project to create a book full of activities, and it is called Journeys at Catmai, an activity book for not-so-junior rangers. And basically what that means, we will have a number of different activities in this book, and once an adult completes it, or a young adult, you can turn the book in to a ranger or mail it back to the park and receive some sort of incentive in return, like a sticker or a patch, something like that. So it's very similar to our junior ranger program. It's just meant for a higher level audience. So we're hoping to have it available both in print, so visitors to the park can visit the visitor center and get a copy at Brooks Camp or in King Salmon, as well as available online. So our bear cam viewers and our remote visitors have the opportunity to participate in the program as well.
And I know that whenever I go to parks, I absolutely love doing the junior ranger programs, and it's great to know that we are going to have something geared for a little higher level as well, because I know only a few parks have that program. But could you tell us more about the timeline? When should we expect to actually be able to complete this book?
Absolutely. We are finishing the final draft of the activity book this summer by September, and then we're hoping to roll out the program in print at the park by next summer.
And I know you mentioned it's going to be similar in ways to the Junior Ranger program, and there are generally quite a few activities in that. And today we're talking about the Valley of 10,000 Smokes and a couple of those activities. But what else can we look forward to seeing in that?
Yeah, so we're going to have about 10 different activities in the book. Those will include a variety of different topics about the resources here at Catmai National Park. So of course we will have a bear activity, as we must. That one will actually be an interesting take on the different bears in the park. So it's more of a compare and contrast activity between the coastal bears and the bears that you see here at Brooks Camp and on the bear cams. So learning more about the similarities and differences between those different brown bears. In addition to that, we will talk about the salmon life cycle. That activity is more of a chutes and ladders type board game, which is a lot of fun. Further, we'll talk about the geology and the landscape of Catmai, and we'll touch a little bit more on those topics later. But we will also feature the history of the park, why it was founded. It's important to protect our national parks, as well as some of the cultural history, like the subsistence use of plants here in Catmai. And so all of these different topics, the ones I mentioned and others, will all be tied together in this book under the same theme. And that theme is journeys, which you see in the title of the book, Journeys at Catmai. And so basically, we're taking these figurative journeys and tying them together to the park and its resources. So whether we're talking about climate change, environmental change and evolution, talking about timelines, whether those are geologic timelines or historical timelines, those are some examples of the figurative journeys in the book. And then literal journeys may feature migration patterns. Where are the animals moving within the park? What are their journeys looking like? As well as the journeys of people. So our visitors who come and travel all the way to Katmai, as well as rangers, researchers, and explorers who have spent time in the park exploring. And so one of the examples of this is actually Robert Griggs, who you can see pictured right now. And he journeyed into the Valley of 10,000 Smokes. And one of our activities does feature the Valley of 10,000 Smokes.
And we will definitely learn more about Robert Griggs throughout this presentation. But to start off, let's talk a little bit more about Novarupta itself. And we have a very short video that we shot earlier from the Robert Griggs Visitor Center using the Valley of 10,000 Smokes as the backdrop. So we will play that for you now.
The Valley of 10,000 Smokes was formed after the 1912 eruption of Novarupta, which was the largest volcanic eruption of the 20th century, and its effects were felt around the world. To put that into perspective, if the volcano had erupted in Manhattan, the steam would be seen in Albany, the sound of the volcanic eruption would be heard in Chicago, and the acidic fumes would reach all the way to Denver. While there were no deaths as a result of the volcanic eruption, the devastating natural disaster displaced rural communities throughout the region. Massive amounts of volcanic rock and ash were dispersed around the area, and the Valley of 10,000 Smokes became a fantastic geologic landscape. Evidence of the volcanic eruption can be seen throughout Katmai, including at Brooks Camp, where pumice lines the beach. Pumice, which is this rock here, is full of holes and is incredibly lightweight. It's so lightweight that it will actually float on water. The reason for that is because it was very fast cooling lava, which is why all of those air bubbles and holes exist. Ash is also found along the trails or in holes that bears have dug up along the trails. Visitors to Brooks Camp have the opportunity to take a bus tour to the Valley of 10,000 Smokes, where they can hike from the Robert Griggs Visitor Center, where I am now, down to the valley floor.
And so in that we talked about Novarupta being the source, that original eruption. But in reality, we didn't know that at first. A lot of people thought that the eruption was actually from a different volcano, Mount Catmai. And it wasn't until later that we knew that it was actually Novarupta. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So what had happened after the eruption, Mount Catmai had collapsed. And so there was the automatic assumption that that was because Mount Catmai had caused the eruption. But actually, Mount Catmai and Novarupta share a magma chamber underground. So as the magma was leaving Mount Catmai and draining over to Novarupta for Novarupta to explode, to erupt, it then caused the collapse of Mount Catmai. And so now there is this huge lake actually in the caldera of Mount Catmai. It's actually about 800 feet deep, so it's pretty sizable. And so when the first explorers came to the Valley of 10,000 Smokes, people like Robert Griggs, they did assume that Mount Catmai was the culprit. It had been the cause of so much destruction and devastation. And it wasn't till 1953 that scientists actually discovered that Novarupta had actually caused the eruption. So one of the activities that we are featuring in the Journeys at Katmai book does go into depth about who Robert Griggs is and why he's important to Katmai. Lian, can you tell us a little bit more about Griggs?
Sure. So Robert Griggs, he was really Katmai's first champion. He was a true advocate for the park. And you can see him pictured here in this photo along with his wife. And he was a botanist by trade, and he first explored the Valley of 10,000 Smokes in 1916, and then again through a series of expeditions subsequently, all of which were funded by the National Geographic Society. And at that time, the valley was covered in steaming fumaroles, essentially all of the valley floor. It gave its landscape. And here we have some video footage, and any black and white clips are also, these are all taken from the Griggs expeditions itself. And so it really gives you an idea of what he was seeing in the first place. And you can actually see this full video of clips that was put together by the National Geographic Society online on Catmai's YouTube page if you are interested in that. But when you're reflecting upon first seeing the valley, Griggs wrote, and I quote, "The sight that flashed into view was one of the most amazing visions ever beheld by mortal eye. The whole valley, as far as the eye could reach, was full of hundreds, no thousands, literally tens of thousands of smokes curling up from its fissured floor. It was as though all of the steam engines in the world assembled together had popped their safety valves at once and were letting steam off in concert." And so that's really where the valley got its name, the Valley of 10,000 Smokes.
And in listening to Griggs' words and hearing his experiences, it's really awesome to be able to see and understand this real sense of wonder and discovery that he must have felt at that moment, much like many of our visitors feel when they come to visit Katmai. It's wonderful to be able to watch our visitors as they experience this wonder when they arrive at the park and see their very first bear, or they step off the bus at the Valley of 10,000 Smokes and see this very rocky, moon-like landscape. And also, like Griggs, we also seem to take a lot of photos and document a lot of our experiences here to try and capture these amazing resources that Katmai has to offer. So can you talk more about how Griggs documented his experiences and what that meant for the park?
Absolutely. So Griggs and his team, when they were out there exploring and learning more about the valley, they documented it through photographs, through prolific writing, and through video. And he shared his findings, and they were published in the National Geographic Society. And it really allowed him to share his passion for the area. And Griggs really pushed to have the Catmai region designated as a national monument. He thought that this area was worthy of protection and preservation. And in 1918, his vision became reality when this area actually did become a Catmai National Monument by presidential proclamation. And it wasn't actually until later, in 1918, when it became a national park. But when you think about Griggs, he always wanted to preserve that landscape, both for its scientific value, but also for the future enjoyment of generations. So people could come out and see the same wonders that he saw and felt. And I think whenever people visit parks or they might complete this activity book, it's always important to bring into the discussion and encourage folks to think about why parks are important and what value they have to us as society and as individuals. So Sarah, could you talk a little bit more about your personal experience and why you think national parks are important?
Yeah, absolutely. Growing up, I visited lots of national parks and national park sites around the nation. That was just part of our family vacations. So I started collecting junior ranger books and filling out these different activity worksheets from a very young age, and I still do so today. But my interest has always been primarily in history. I'm a huge history buff. A lot of my Park Service experience has been at historic sites. So I love that so many of our units of the National Park Service do not only feature nature, but also history. And they really go hand in hand. So places like Katmai, you get to see these amazing bears, but also talk about such a diverse and fascinating history as well. What about you, Lian?
I think in my personal experience, it's really easy to use Katmai as an example because just like you mentioned, there is so much here. To any of your interests, you can find it here at Katmai and find that connection. Whether you're thinking about geology, volcanology, even the coast, Katmai has nearly 500 miles of coastline. And of course, the bears, the wildlife, the wilderness, the ability to go out and explore, and that human history too. So Katmai has long been inhabited for people spanning back 9,000 years or so. And so when you think about this park, there really is something for everybody in making that connection.
Yeah, absolutely. It's clear we're both big fans of Katmai National Park.
A little biased.
But so was Griggs. Why do you think Griggs was such a strong advocate for Katmai and really pushed for its designation as a national park site?
I think the easiest way to go about it is to use Griggs's own words. And he wrote that I recognized at once that the Katmai district must be made a great national park, accessible to all the people, like the Yellowstone. So he really believed that this place would become the next Yellowstone. There are so many features which are similar. You have boiling mud pots back in his day. You have the steaming fumaroles, and that are very similar to geysers in a sense. Sometimes the columns of steam rising over 1,000 feet high before dissipating. But many of these features, like the boiling mud pots, like these steaming fumaroles, or smokes, as Griggs liked to call them, they have since gone extinct, essentially. Only now can we still see some evidence. Some are a little active, but not nearly what he saw. But we do see evidence of these fumaroles, like in this picture here, and you can see all the different colors from the minerals itself.
Yeah, so Griggs must have had a very unique experience in the Valley of 10,000 Smokes, that is for sure. And lots of people do go and still visit the valley today. Lian, you have spent quite a bit of time down in the valley. Would you care to share a little bit about your personal experience and how that compares to Griggs?
Sure. I've been fortunate to do a couple different backpacking trips in the valley and to actually go see Novarupta itself. And to be there and know what history you're standing in, it's just a really impressive and awe-inspiring place to be. And when I first knew about Catmai, I really didn't know so much about even pumice or about this volcanic landscape. My idea of volcanoes was very, very different. And so to come here and be able to see this, to see all the different colors, like you can here in this picture, which is from Pea Soup Pass, and pumice can be really colorful at times. And being in the valley itself is just something that I wish that everybody had the chance to experience, because you might not even see another soul out there. So as you're traversing this landscape, it feels like you might be the first person to see this, just like Griggs was the first person to see the valley. And that's kind of what I like about this landscape, is that you can go out there and I can pretend to be Griggs. What it does is it really inspires me to observe my surroundings and learn more about it. But you know, I've had this great trip in the valley, but some people have been fortunate enough to even retrace more of Griggs's expedition.
Yeah, so a couple years ago, 3 years actually, we were celebrating the centennial of Katmai National Park. And as a result, a group of rangers that included the park's archaeologists and a few others retraced Griggs's journey through the Valley of 10,000 Smokes. So while that sounds hard enough as it is, they were also taking 4 years of expeditions and putting them into 4 weeks. So they were following these expeditions as closely as they could, which was increasingly more difficult because of the fact that the landscape has changed so much since Griggs's time there over 100 years ago. And so they relied really heavily on his photographs as well as his document and writing in order to pinpoint his location and where he was and where he traveled. And so the goal of this trip for the archaeologists was partially to learn more about the Griggs expedition while retracing his steps, but also to learn more about the rural communities that lived in the Katmai region and called this place home prior to the 1912 eruption of Novarupta. And so the team hopes in the future to be able to have access to technology that will actually allow them to scan the ground and see what lies beneath all of the layers of pumice and ash.
I think you bring up a really good point in that you mentioned how people were displaced from this, but you know, we saw Griggs was drawn here. So today and in the past, a lot of different people have actually now come to this area because of that. And pivoting a little bit from Griggs, that includes NASA.
Yes, absolutely. So about 50 years after Griggs was in the Valley of 10,000 Smokes, NASA brought out a group of astronauts and scientists. So this is one of my favorite little tidbits, fun facts of Katmai history, and we are including it in the activity book as a little game that you can play. And so why they chose the Valley of 10,000 Smokes for NASA training is kind of fun. It actually looked like a lunar landscape. And if you've seen the 10,000 Smokes or looking at this picture here, you may agree that it looks otherworldly. It looks like you might on the moon. And so because of the ash, the rock, and the very desert-like landscape and ecosystem, they thought that it would be a good representation of the moon for these geology trainings.
And can you tell us a little bit more about specifically what kind of trainings they actually did in the valley?
Yeah, so they called their training Playing the Moon Game, which is fun. And basically what that meant is that the astronauts were dropped off by helicopter into the Valley of 10,000 Smokes. And they had very little information. They were given a communication device and sent on some sort of geological mission. And so their goal was to complete this mission and communicate their findings with the scientists on the other end of the communication device. And so you can see in the picture here, they did a lot of tours and things like that. These photos are courtesy of NASA. And it's really fascinating to think about the fact that this really wasn't that long after Griggs discovered the valley.
And in the book itself, we're actually going to have a chance to kind of play the moon game, maybe a little bit different than them, but it's definitely an activity in there which I look forward to seeing. Of course, if you do see the valley in person, we obviously don't recommend that you play the actual moon game and get dropped off there with very little information. But there were actually some well-known people who came.
Yeah, so it's kind of exciting. We had two different groups who came to Brooks Camp, where they stayed, and then did their training over at the Valley of 10,000 Smokes. And one of the astronauts included was Buzz Aldrin, who's our own little Apollo 11 celebrity. So that's really exciting to note, that there were some really fantastic and fascinating individuals who came to Katmai to train for these moon missions.
And I know a little bit of Katmai's claim to fame, but we aren't the only national park site, right, that they train for these Apollo missions.
You're right. We are one of 4 in this section of geology training that they did for the astronauts. The other parks included were Big Bend in Texas, the Grand Canyon in Arizona, and then Craters of the Moon, which was very aptly named, in Idaho. And so those landscapes, while they're in very different regions of the United States, do share a lot of similarities in terms of the landscape. They are all very dry, very rocky, very barren, and one might argue very moon-like. So it made sense why they selected these parks in addition to Katmai. And so those of you who are able to participate in our Journeys at Katmai activity book will have the opportunity to learn more about the fascinating geological landscape that is Katmai and the Valley of 10,000 Smokes, as well as experience the wonder and the discovery and understand why Katmai is such a great place for research and for things that are awe-inspiring. And so we are very excited to roll out these activities and to have them available for you next summer to try out. And we hope that you will have the opportunity to learn more about Katmai's diverse history, its very fascinating wildlife, as well as its changing landscapes.
So thanks for sharing your knowledge about the valley and your passion for it. And I think we have time for a few questions before we sign off for today. If any audience members, here's one for you. Sarah, where can we order the book?
Yes, so as I mentioned briefly earlier, it's still in production, so you can't order it quite yet. But once it is released next summer, if you are not visiting the park, you can always call Katmai or send an email to our visitor information from the website and request that a book be sent to you. In addition to that, it will be available online, so you could print off a digital copy as well.
And I just want to add there that it is a free resource to everybody. There is no cost for this, so it's much like the Junior Ranger book in that aspect. All right, and so, Sarah, what animals besides bears have an interesting journey that you think we should know about?
Well, I think the bears and the salmon go hand in hand. Those are our two big ones that we do talk about a lot here at Katmai. And our salmon activity is a really fun game that takes you through the life cycle. And so what it will do, you'll start as an egg, and then you'll go all the way through until you reach the point of a spawning adult. And you will learn more about this life cycle and the journey, both literal and figurative, that these salmon go through to get to the ocean and back here at Brooks, and then into the mouths of bears, or up the river and spawning, which is very exciting. And then on top of that, Katmai has some other really fascinating wildlife, especially the birds. You know, we have such a huge group of migratory birds that come up here from all over the world. And we actually will be having another live chat that will focus on Katmai birds later this month. So keep an eye out for that.
And I do believe that's going to be the 20th August. That's a Friday at 3 p.m. So do keep that in mind if you're interested in that migratory journey. So is there a lake in the Mount Katmai caldera? Is it an anaerobic lake?
That's an excellent question. I do not know the answer to that. Is that something that you know, Lian?
I'm honestly going to have to take a pass and say that I would need to look that.
Yes, but we will be sure to look that, because that is a very fascinating question. And as you may have seen in the picture, it's a very massive lake. It's a beautiful lake, and it seems very unusual. And Lian and I were actually talking earlier this week about how it would be interesting if Mount Katmai were to erupt, what that would mean and how that lake might actually impact an eruption or the type of volcanic debris that would result.
I think we probably have a couple more. So is Novarupta still an active volcano?
It is actually, which is very interesting. We have a lot of active volcanoes here at Katmai. Some of them you can occasionally see steaming, which is very exciting. And so because of that, you never know, when these natural disasters may happen, but they do monitor the different tectonic activity in the valley. And so the idea is that if there's a lot of tectonic plate activity, then there might be a volcanic eruption. So they're able to kind of see these different things and see what may happen with the volcanoes in the future.
What language does Catmai come from and what does it mean?
Excellent question. We do have over 9,000 years of native history here at Katmai, which I know you're fairly familiar with. Is that something you'd like to tackle?
I'm actually not sure where Catmai comes from, and I can see Naomi in the background also shaking her head too. So we don't know that. I'm sure that there has to be an answer. I know a lot of these mountains around here actually have more anglicized names as what we're more familiar with. There are some in the area. I do know that this Brooks Camp area was called Kittavik, which does refer to this area here. But in terms of what Katmai comes from, I'm not sure. There were three major cultural groups in the area: the Alutiiq Supiaq, the Dina Ina, and the Yupik. But I'm not exactly sure what language Katmai comes from.
Why are the seagulls all hanging out over there?
And I believe it says, I was interested to know Robert Griggs wasn't wearing any protective gear while walking among the fumaroles. Was it dangerous?
So it could have been, yes. He actually talks about in that black and white video that we showed clips of earlier, in the full-length video, it quotes Griggs, and it talks about how some of those fumaroles may have been up to 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit. There are some pictures of the expedition team wearing gas masks, because there were gaseous steams that were occurring. But what's really funny is the fact that they actually would cook over these fumaroles. And I find that so fascinating. Griggs spends a lot of time in that film and in his book talking about eating over the fumaroles and what things cook well and what things don't. And he even talks about one man on the expedition who ate too many flapjacks and had to stay behind while they all explored one day.
And there is actual footage of them cooking like bacon over the fumarole. So you do know that it is quite warm. I do believe he gave an estimate of every once in a while he does talk about his shoes, and sometimes they got pretty warm. Yeah. So it is definitely something to think about. But I believe that's all the time we have for questions. So I want to thank every one of you for joining us today, for asking your questions, to showing this continued interest in aspects of the park. And we really do have a full lineup of events this August, so be sure to tune in to the explore.org bear cams. And I would like to thank Ranger Sarah for joining us today, as well as all of the Explore staff behind the scenes. And again, we're coming to you from Katmai National Park. And as Explore says, never stop learning.